Hi there, Marcus here, FUT202 Lecture 10. Are you ready? Optimism. Optimism, an essential future sense. Without it, life shrinks and our souls and spirits shrivel up. We go around feeling rather ordinary and diminished at best, and often quite depressed and even savage and violent. So there's something to be said about optimism. We've talked about it last week, covered sort of the broad sweep of the idea. This session, I guess, is focused more on the doing, the practice of optimism. So without further ado, I think we will just leap straight into the lecture itself. So we've got this lovely little portal here looking at you, and the portal is really a way of understanding that we need to guard our heart space, our core aspirational self. And for me, I've always used the metaphor, I say always, but I can't remember when I didn't, should I say, perhaps is a better way of putting it. The metaphor of the garden, that we have this kind of secret garden within ourselves that we inhabited as children, and we left it at some point, at later childhood, into adolescence or whatever. Sometimes we retreat back into it, and a few people are very good at keeping their secret garden going all the time, of course. But many of us forget it, let it sort of get overgrown, and leave the garden gate open or whatever. And we forget to look after that core inner self. That's the way I've understood optimism in that lens. So I'm going to talk about it more now, but I want to start off by sharing with you a really beautiful poem. It's a section from a poem. It's a very long poem. In fact, it's a book written as a poem called Brand New Ancients by K. Tempest. And she's a wonderful young poet, was a poet laureate for Britain, probably the youngest one ever, I think. I say she, but I should say they, really, because Kay was Kate, and has much of her poetry actually hinges on this ambivalence or ambiguity around gender identity and so on. But this particular poem, which moves across those landscapes, towards the end of the poem, she makes this incredible statement. Essentially, she's saying that everybody is potentially a god, or is a god in actual fact, even though we may not know it. It's a little bit like the secret garden stuff. She says, we are ancient, brand new, basic, and far beyond making ourselves into nothing. We need to recognize we're something, and that we can be the gods we were born to be, through loving. Yes, the gods are on the park bench. The gods are on the bus. The gods are all here. The gods are in us. The gods are timeless, fearless, fighting to be bold. Conviction is a heavy hand to hold. Grip it, winged sandals tearing up the pavement. You, me, everyone, brand new ancient. Now she delivers it in this beautiful, almost Cockney-ish London accent, very much a spoken poet, and so much better than me reading it to you then. And I would recommend you can go and easily find her on YouTube delivering poems like this. Now, the point for me, though, is that we can be the gods we were born to be. And this is, when I was first reading through this poem, I was riveted by the incredible ability to make the ordinary extraordinary that K. Tempest was sharing with us through this and many of her other poems as well. So I recommend that as a way, and poetry, of course, always makes me feel optimistic. But let's look at a little bit of perspective now. So Rebecca Solnit, I think this woman's amazing, great thinker. Always, she writes in an accessible essayist type style, and her thinking is littered with deep insights into all sorts of things. So a few years ago, I got my hands on this lovely little book called Hope in the Dark, and she makes this wonderful point. Look, the most foundational change of all, the one from which all else issues, is hardest to track. It means that politics arises out of the spread of ideas and the shaping of imaginations. The spread of ideas and the shaping of imaginations, that's the future's business, okay, in many respects. It means that symbolic and cultural acts, that's the sort of memory space and the foresight space, have political power. That makes me optimistic straight away. And it also, she goes on, means that the changes that count take place not merely on stage, let's say, some president is up on the stage as action, but in the minds of those who are again and again pictured only passively, I would say, as audience or bystanders. That's you and me, that's the common folk, right? The revolution that counts is the one that takes place in the imagination. So, to me, so much of the work of futurists is imagineering or imagination activism. It's about kindling the fires of imagination so that we become less governed, of course, Foucault, but also more adventurous in imagining. And of course, imagining is not simply done in the head. It leaks into life. It leaks into the way we conduct our lives and live our lives, both as individuals, but also collectively. So we've spent a bit of time talking about optimism as a verb. Can you practice optimism? Well, this is a spiritual practice in my mind. Now, I describe it as such in this little link here, the nurturing game, which is an online snapshot of one of the activities that I ran a few years ago when I was in the Netherlands, particularly, where I really refined it. But the nurturing game is one way of identifying and enacting through playful, fun space, the idea that there is a space within us, that secret garden, that we need to keep safe, nurture, cultivate, prune, and pull out the weeds when they get in there, keep out the elements of our worlds that would desecrate, I guess, because I do see it as a sacred space, desecrate our secret gardens. So I've run this game as a way to illustrate how we need to constantly guard our heart, which in Sanskrit is called Ishta, our most cherished object, that which we care for the most out of all the things in our world, of course, which deserve care. There is a sense that Ishta, for me, is an abstract. In the original Sanskrit sense, of course, it was really the divine or the divine companion, the divine friend. It was then humanized or anthropomorphized into the form of a guru, for instance. But in my thinking about it, Ishta is the space within us, the sacred space within us, which of course is where the ultimate sacred being, the divine, might sit. Okay, and you can choose to frame the divine in whatever way you like. If you're a churchy type or a religious type, you can frame it within the language of your traditions. I'm drawing on Ishta, which is the language of a spiritual tradition, a strand of Hinduism or Vedanta. In my context, I'm thinking of it through the lens of a tantric epistemology, which means a way of seeing the world that sees the world always in constant struggle or tension, because that's how we shape and refine our own thinking and our own life practices. We make sense of things through that as well. So Ishta to me is that inner garden, and I'll talk more about that. So our inner health depends on this cherished object being kept safe. Keeping this heartland free of the negativity of a crudifying world or culture is very important. Negative culture breeds negativity. Negative culture, in a sense, is fake culture. Like we have fake truth, well, we can, have fake culture that tells us that, men are men and women are women, for instance. There's no law given that says men are men as currently constructed and women are women as currently understood. We are encultured into these things. if they empower us or help us be better people, better members of this life, well and good. I would call that healthy culture. The other stuff which masquerades as culture is actually, forms of oppression and violence. Ignorance in the world, we might say. So, what do we do with our inner garden? Love this. This is from that movie, The Secret Garden, which is based on a book from, I think, the early 20th century. I imagine our inner heart space as a walled garden with a gate. For many of us, we do not know that the garden is there. We've forgotten it. We lived in it once as children, but then forgot about it as we were encultured into our world, the world out there, the real world, the world we need to be realistic in. We need to be practical and pragmatic and give up on half or most of our dreams. Metaphorically, we've left the gate open. To practice optimism, to cultivate this future sense, we need to close the gate and nurture that garden. So I had the good fortune to play with this kind of idea of the garden with a group of us on our Tuesday session, our workshop. And Kate very kindly set up the Padlet for us, and we spent some time putting up elements of our garden. What would we see in our garden? And then we spent some time discussing it. Padlet is free for you to use. You can create up to 3 Padlets before they ask you to start paying anything. So it's a lot of fun, and of course you just delete a Padlet when you've played with it, so that you can keep yourself at the 3 without having to pay. But this was really lovely. So you can see there, the images of fungi and furry pets. Oh, the bird outside is being very noisy. Gates and so on. There's references to music and so on. So yeah, lots of fun, and also a rich snapshot on the inner world of our secret gardens, collective secret garden here. So I want to emphasize this, that this space within, this source of optimism, is a sacred space. And again, sacred can mean whatever you choose to make of it. I'm not being in any way sort of dogmatic, orthodox, or in, I guess, within religious context. I see this as sacred to me, is that which fundamentally underpins everything and brings life and beauty and awe and wonder into our world. So what happens in this space? Well, we can nurture that space through practices, and I'm going to talk about a few of those in a minute. But it's very much about, first of all, just becoming aware that this space exists, and that possibly, quite possibly, we've let it run down. We've left the door open, and all sorts of unhealthy visitors have crept in there that need to be politely asked to leave. Okay, so how do we think? Well, remember, this is a course about futures feeling, this one. Futures thinking was what we did in Futures 101. I want to bind them together, and I want to ask Timothy Morton to help me do this. So he's written this wonderful book called Dark Ecology, and it's a really rich and thoughtful book, and it's filled in his own way with Morton's own kind of sacredness as well. But he says, look, in our garden, thought itself is a way of getting high. I love that. Go and take a thought mushroom and see what happens. Human attunement to thinking has been intoxicated into recognizing its non-human status. So in other words, the human and the non-human, or the more than human, what happens in our garden, it's flourishing. You notice that in the image that we had before, there were all sorts of, there were furry pets, but there were also fungi and seedlings and so forth. So for me then, the thought and the feeling, they actually go hand in hand. And our most exciting and stimulating thinking is always accompanied with feeling. You can't actually separate the two. That's why reason has always been subverted by emotion. So people who deny climate change, or think that men are like this and women are like that, they are emotionally bound to their perspective, and the emotion gives it a sense of truth validation. Okay, and that's because truth is an emotion as well, as I think I've said in earlier lectures. So I want to remind you then, I want to go to this slide from the last lecture, talking about building community, crafting purpose, and amplifying voice. These are tools, and they all involve us in activating our future sense of optimism and taking it into the world. But we do need to be careful, because the lowest common denominator will always try to pull you down. And, you know, as I often tell people, I avoid staff rooms. I avoid staff rooms because they're places where gossip and bitchiness and, you know, the negativity of our working world often appear, and they just suck you dry. So you've got to be careful about where you go and who you sit with, who you choose to play, your tribe, basically, I'm thinking about here. And this starts off with saying, no, that's not a healthy space for me. I will not go there. And what do you do? Well, that's the beginning of small acts of resistance, where you say, no, I'm going to go towards things that empower me. Small acts of grace instead of resistance. Okay, you don't want to just resist. Resistance on its own is also not particularly good for you. But when you act engaged, should I say, in small acts of grace, that's when you are actually resistant. Okay, so read a poem like the one that I just cited earlier from K. Tempest, walk barefoot on the grass, dance in the rain, share positive stories, imagining alternatives, being happy for absolutely no reason, being sad when sadness comes visiting. That's perfectly fine. Welcoming the unexpected. This is just my shopping list that I whacked onto this slide for you, just to sort of ignite your thinking. You can take that list and then add to it and add to it and add to it. You know, there's no limit there. You know, so we need to affirm these things, and our right just to be happy, for instance, or just to be, oh, it's okay, I'm not neither happy nor sad, I'm just sort of blah. And then you go out and you look at a flower and suddenly you're feeling a little bit less blah. Okay, so I'm the hero of my life. So affirmation is really important. We are enough. We are both whole and broken, and that's also fine. We need to affirm one another, give one another big hugs, and just say, you're a fabulous person, and that sort of stuff. Share the journey, be generous. In vulnerability, we find the kind of softness needed to empower us. And that softness and vulnerability can sometimes be that, you know, when you're with people and you want to affirm them, but you also need to remember that it's not just affirming that's hollow. You've got to mean it. But also part of affirmation is sometimes telling people that in some way they are getting it wrong, that they are giving their power away, or they're seeking to hold on to their power by taking power from others, whatever it might be. There has to be a kind of optimistic honesty going on here. So that means vulnerability that's soft but not weak. We're not disempowered. We need to cherish our gifts. We need to also gift others and be their mirror. That's what I was talking about just before. We all need mirrors to get an honest grip on how we are in the world and how we're being perceived in the world, but we also need to help one another with that. And that's where a huge amount of trust comes in. Very important. So you've got to remember who you are. And this takes me back to poetry. This beautiful book, Portals, which has been the poetry of a friend, colleague of mine, Celeste Nazali-Snober. She's a Canadian academic at one level, but more of a heartademic, really. She does a lot of dance work and links dance and poetry with curriculum needs, particularly in education and so on. She's collaborated with the visual artist Susie Morris to create this book. But I grabbed on this particular poem when I opened it up a few days ago, and I thought I want to share it with you. So she says, "Give me morsels of joy written on the flesh. There is enough sorrow to fill an ocean in these times. Yet we are still knit in the call to jouissance, joy, radiate from the outside. Even a sentence of joy can be medicine. And I think that's part of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about affirmation. So I thoroughly recommend this book to you. It's very new, but yeah, and it's a rich source, I think, of optimism. So we've got to remember, and I'm going back to Morton now, there is a hidden collective here. And I want to sort of walk you through Morton's thinking. This is from the beginning of his book on dark ecology. He says, look, thinking the human at Earth magnitude is utterly uncanny, strangely familiar and familiarly strange. It is as if I realize that I am a zombie, or better than that, I am a component of a zombie despite my will. What does he mean by that? Again, every time I start my car, I'm not meaning personally to destroy life forms, which of course is what destroying the Earth actually means. Nor does my action have any statistical meaning, and yet, mysteriously and disturbingly, scaled up to the Earth magnitude, so that there are billions of hands that are turning billions of ignitions in billions of starting cars or engines every few minutes, the sixth mass extinction event is precisely what is being caused. So he advocates for thinking at species level, but acting at the individual level. Just to be aware that as a species, we are having incredibly, powerful impact on planetary systems. We're, of course, not the first species to do that. Bacteria did it when they were colonizing the oceans and changing the planet so that it could sustain more complex life. But at the moment, our species is up to tricks. We've got to remember that, so that when we rewire or reconfigure ourselves as individuals, there is a knock-on effect at the species level. The more of us who are working collectively to find pathways to richer and more fulfilling but less damaging futures, the better. Okay, so you and I, we're starting the work. We're already doing it. We've been doing it all our lives, no doubt, I think. So it's about becoming conscious that we have agency at different levels. The species level agency is totally different from the level that you and I experience on our daily, in our daily lives. All right, so then one point that I want to touch on that made me deeply optimistic was something that happened to me just yesterday. Yesterday, I went with Camilla Mazzini-Alistair off to meet a friend of ours that we've actually been friends with online but never got around to meeting face-to-face, Claire Marshall. And Claire is one of those infectious futurists. She's deeply, or the jouissance is what comes from that poem from Snowbird. She embodies that. She embodies this kind of bubbling, creative joy. And it was a great time. We had a great chat with her, and we met her lovely friend Jemima, and they were up for a conference, but they worked for a group called Taxi, which sounds cool, doesn't it? Taxi. And they generate the awareness of collective purpose. It's really important. So this is a center. So there's a, did I embed the link here? No, I didn't. I must have put it underneath. I'll have to make sure that it's in the PowerPoint underneath, so that you can actually go there. It's a really good website. They've got a lot of resources. So they work in the Center for Social Innovation. Okay, it's a non-profit organisation that helps Australia innovate for social impact and better lives. And they work across a whole range of media. It was just excellent to hear their stories, to find like-minded people, which is always important, right? For optimism and so on, and to share that optimism with others. I think we need to understand that we can generate the awareness of collective purpose, exactly what this taxi is doing with Claire and Jemima. And we need to also remember, of course, we've got to pace ourselves. We've got to listen, be patient, invite and allow cross-pollination. So I want to sum up now my thinking about optimism by taking you through a couple of paragraphs from one of my papers. Okay, so we've got to remember that optimism characterizes the human response to limits. It's like all the senses, it can be and often is blunted by life world experiences, which impose limits on the possible and delegitimize the expansiveness that energizes this quality. Expansive, it expands us. Optimism expands us. It helps us engage with the limits that are often self-imposed, especially on the imagination. A grounded optimism works carefully towards goals over the short, medium, and long term. Okay, so that's a lot of the future's structural stuff. It is informed by plausible readings of context, which refuse to give in to the limits imposed by reasonable people. Yes, the limits imposed by, to be reasonable is to walk out of your secret garden, leave the door open, and say, this is what the world's like, this is how I need to play the game. But no. So reasonableness is not a virtue when you are employing this sense. That's the sense of optimism. Dreaming and seeking, experimenting and testing. These are the tools deployed by this sense, which intuits that there is always more to this world than meets the eye. It understands at some deep level that whatever the eye perceives is not actually real. And finally, optimism casts aside a naive empiricism, the realist's imperialism, and embraces broader ontological possibilities where synergy and surprise work at creating new orders of being in which memory, foresight and voice all converge in an understanding that optimists are the shaman of the possible in a world inhabited by emperors and new clothes, hence the image there. So I really want you to embrace optimism, practice it, and develop all kinds of strategies for in your own workshop space or your own living space, wherever you function, both in terms of job, career, but also in terms of, as a human being, that you engage in fostering optimism and developing your own tools kit, and it can be using the futures tools that we've got. The futures triangle helps people be very optimistic. So does CLA, but so do things like my game about nurturing game and so on. I hope this was helpful, and of course at the end there is the I should pull it up, I guess. There is the reference list. That's probably all for me today. It's a bit shorter, this one, but that's all cool, isn't it? I look forward to seeing when we start looking at yearning, longing. What is it that calls us into the world? Start thinking about that, and I will see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.